you tonight to the 2024 Victoria Festival of Authors. To get things started, I'm going to introduce you to Barbara Pellman. Big round of applause.
Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Barbara Pellman. I'm a board member of the Victoria Festival of Authors. And this is Field Notes. 4 writers, actually 3 tonight, share their works in progress, featuring Maleea Acker, Mary Bomford, Pauline Holdstock. The Victoria Festival of Authors and Langham Court Theatre are located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as listeners and learners. Thank you to our funders and our sponsors, the Canadian Council of the Arts, the BC Arts Council, and the Province of British Columbia, the CRD, the City of Victoria, the Victoria Foundation, Access Copyright, Langham Court Theatre, and Monroe's Books. A special thank you to the Greater Victoria Public Library for sponsoring this event. Thank you also to Mo's Home Collection, right here, and Poppy Floral Art for providing our background. There will be no intermission during this event. There are washrooms right across the hall if needed. Closed captioning is provided and can be accessed through your phone or tablet. Please ask a volunteer for the Wi-Fi password and the URL link. At the end of the event, books will be available for purchase and for signing, though this is a manuscript night. This panel is hosted by Sarah Cassidy. Sarah's nonfiction and poetry have won numerous awards, and her 21 children's books have been nominated for the City of Victoria Children's Book Prize and the Governor-General's Literary Award. She walks and works in James Bay, where the Lekwungen people have fished and gathered for thousands of years. Enjoy.
Absolutely thrilling to be here and to be so heard. Good evening and welcome to Reports from the Field. I am thrilled to be here with these writers who have agreed to answer any question I ask. And I just love this regular VFA event, the chance to hear from writers in the messy midst of things, their words in the raw, freshly dug from the earth or plucked from the air and not yet pummeled and perfected by the editing passes and starching proofreads of publication. I want to say it's a loss that Dene English Catlea is not able to join us, but do please look for her 5th book, Mother Earth is Our Elder, out in next year, and her most recent book is here, I think I saw on the table, so please take a look at that, and I think we're all sorry that she's not with us tonight. So after a very short discussion, these 3 writers will read for about 10 minutes from their current WIP, work in progress, and then we'll get into a conversation about things like why this project now, and how the heck do you do it? Mary Bomford, our first reader, says that as a child, she would listen to her father and his friends tell their World War II stories around the kitchen table over and over again, and she'd think how boring these men were and stuck in their pasts, and she swore she would never live her life backwards. Well, Mary is now working on her 2nd memoir about her time 40 years ago with CUSO, Canadian University Service Overseas, in newly independent Zambia. Mary's first book, Red Dust and Cicada Songs, explored the optimism and idealism of newlywed English teachers. In the book, she considers whether she helped her students or, quote, injected them with the shortcomings of Western culture. Red Dust and Cicada Songs was shortlisted for last year's Victoria Book Prize. Mary's current project digs into her time as a new mother involved in a farming project, bonding with other mothers in Zambia, and learning about the universal questions of women's lives, about fertility, love, work, and family responsibilities. She says, what those women taught me still have complex repercussions for my life in Canada. Maleea Acker, our second reader, is the author of 3 poetry collections, and I'm going to read out the titles because they exhibit Maleea's lyricism, her intelligent curiosity, and her care. Oh, yes, sorry. Oh my gosh, what's the big difference, isn't it? Yeah, I'm going to read out the titles because they exhibit Maleea's, as I said, lyricism and her curiosity and her care. Airproof Green, The Reflecting Pool, Hesitating Once to Feel Glory. She's also the author of the nonfiction book Gardens Aflame, Garry Oak Meadows of BC's South Coast, which charts the restoration of an endangered Vancouver Island ecosystem. Maleea holds a PhD in human geography, an MFA in poetry, and an MA in literature, and she lectures at UVic and Thompson Rivers University. And as a UVic postdoctoral researcher funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada, she is using storytelling and art to urge action on climate change. She's interested in translation, the natural world, eco-poetics, geohumanities, and geopoetics. Maleea has said that, I think I've let different aspects of myself to the fore as I've moved from book to book. And we'll find out what is coming to the fore as she writes her current poetry collection. Pauline Holdstock, our third reader, is an intrepid craftsperson, a novelist, short fiction writer, and essayist with books published internationally. In Canada, her work has been shortlisted for the Giller and the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, among others, and she has won the BC Book Prize for fiction. She says that in her earlier book, she was careful to write in a way that was distant from her personal life by at least 100 years or 9,000 miles. And so she acquired the label historical fiction writer, but that was not at all how she saw her work. In 2018, she swerved and wrote the enchanting novel Here I Am in the voice of a wise, observant 6-year-old, Francis, a boy living in England in the 1960s. And then in 2022, she edged even closer to home and wrote in the voice of a mother of 4 living in Vancouver in the 1990s. That book, Confessions with Keith, won the City of Victoria Butler Book Prize. And she says she is pivoting again, even closer towards poetry. We will hear more about this poetry tonight. And Pauline, you also say you changed your byline 5 times and would like to add a 6th and publish under the name Sinead Lennon. Does this mean you have various pen names?
Sorry?
Do you have various pen names?
No, but I applied for my Irish citizenship. And I
We need your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. And, oh yeah. I applied for Irish citizenship, and my father's name was Lennon, and I thought, yeah, my middle name is Jane, Sinead. I think I'll be Sinead Lennon.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I haven't followed through.
No, you are Pauline Holdstock. Yeah,
Right,
thank
right.
You. Okay. And Mary, Maleea, and Pauline, I asked you each to bring some short excerpts from a writer or two who's inspiring your current project. Could you tell us a bit about the writer and what it is about them that is inspiring your work in progress? Their writing style, their approach, their subject, and of course read their excerpt. Thank you.
The writer I chose after a lot of messing around this morning is Rebecca Solnit, who's an essayist and maybe share some of the ideas of Maleea with the idea that art can move society, can move ideas, especially in the area of environment. What I chose from Rebecca was this, because I'm writing nonfiction. Nonfiction is, at its best, an act of putting the world back together or tearing some piece of it apart to find what's hidden beneath the assumptions or conventions. And in this sense, creation and destruction can be akin. The process can be incandescent with excitement, whether from finding some unexpected scrap of information or from recognizing the patterns that begin to arise as the fragments begin to assemble. Something you didn't know well comes into focus, and the world makes sense in a new way, or an old assumption is gutted, and then you try to write it down. I felt this related to my process of writing this second memoir, because there were so many ideas that I had held quite firmly in my head about this experience of 50 years ago. But as I began to write and did way more research, because now I had the internet and I could find out things that I couldn't find out at that time, and learned that a lot of my assumptions were completely off base. So it's been this constant kind of stepping off balance, exploring one idea and then having to change my idea about it, and trying to figure out how I'm going to then write about that, incorporate the past with where my head's come to now. So I hope that
That's wonderful.
explains why.
Thank you, Mary.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
wonderful. Maleea, what did you bring?
I brought two things, and I won't read from both of them because that'll take too much time, but the first is the newest book of poems by Bren Simmers called The Work, which has just been nominated for the Governor General's Award. She's one of my best friends, and I'm just over the moon. This book is beautiful. It's swimming in kind of dual rivers of joy and loss. She's working through grief, the loss of her father, and the impending loss of her mother, and a sister-in-law. And are you okay? It's just gorgeous. And then the second is the story of a poem, which is a kind of memoir, but also a kind of treatise on poetry and what it is to write, by Matthew Zapruder, and also highly worth picking up. It just came out this year. And I thought I'd just read this small bit. Really, you could open the book anywhere. It's his journey of what it is to write a poem, going through various stages, but it's also a memoir of the loss of his father and him accustoming himself to the birth of his first son being diagnosed with autism. But he's also talking a lot about poetry and what it is to write poems. And he says, to write a poem is to ask a question. The question only gradually comes into being as the poem moves from chaos to necessity. Who is listening? What might they need? What can I do in this space that I cannot do anywhere else? What use can I be? Most of the poems I love to read and reread don't give me conclusive answers to anything, at least not answers they already know. Often what they clarify is painful and reveals irresolvable conflicts, or maybe something that is joyful, but also shattered with mortality. As a poem moves along, it can begin not merely to answer questions, but to ask deeper, unanswerable ones. The poem becomes a place to eternally preserve the living question. And I love that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Pauline.
Well, I've brought along a very short paragraph from John Berger, and it's talking about poetry and its place in relation to war, which I think is exactly why I've made this swerve towards poetry at the moment, because the times that we're living in are so critical and it all feels so urgent that I would like to respond, and I'd like to respond quickly. No one can wait for a novel at the moment. And in John Berger's book called And Our Faces, My Heart, Brief as Photos, he writes a little bit about the relation of poetry to war and violence. Poems, even when narrative, do not resemble stories. All stories are about battles of one kind or another, which end in victory or defeat. Everything moves towards the end, when the outcome will be known. Poems, regardless of any outcome, cross the battlefields, tending the wounded, listening to the wild monologues of the triumphant or the fearful. They bring a kind of peace, not by anesthesia or easy reassurance, but by recognition and promise that what has been experienced cannot disappear as if it had never been. Yet the promise is not of a monument. Who still on a battlefield wants monuments? The promise is that language has acknowledged, has given shelter to the experience which demanded, which cried out.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I hear this from chaos to necessity keeps coming through that. And that necessity is that peaceful thing. Those are wonderful readings. Thank you so much. Mary, would you like to read from your current work in progress?
All right. There's a mic over there.
Yes, I think so.
Good evening. And can you hear me? All right, thank you. I want to thank you, the planners, the writers, and the readers, and the listeners who've come together to share our exploration of words and ideas. Tonight, I'll take you to 1973, a time of social upheaval fueled by optimism, hope, and generous naivety. Can you imagine such a time? A time when young Canadian volunteers accepted the invitations of newly independent countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean to come and support transitions to self-government by sharing their skills as teachers, agriculturalists, and technicians. I responded to that invitation and found myself near the center of the African continent in off-grid rural Zambia, living in a thatched roof farmhouse built of sun-dried brick, surrounded by family villages. By happenstance, I began an informal first aid clinic from the veranda of the house. It was mostly used by neighboring farmers who required help for themselves, their children, and their wives. Through bandages, antibiotics, ointments, and antimalarials, we tentatively explored our curiosity about each other and how we lived our lives. None of the women who were my neighbors spoke English, so they took me in hand and taught me Chitonga. My relationships with those women and their unconditional acceptance became a cornerstone in my life, my base for understanding the universality of women's experience, and my conviction that it is possible for our common humanity to cross all boundaries of language, color, and ethnicity. The chapter I will read you is called Medicine Woman. Most things began with the sound of soft clapping at the door, followed by a voice calling, Odi, That afternoon, the voice belonged to Tiki. He stood at the bottom of the 4 concrete steps that led to my front door. He wore a once blue suit jacket over faded khaki shorts, black plastic flip-flops, and a white shirt tinted light rust by the red soil that flowed in the stream where his wife, Leandro, did the laundry. Tiki removed his trademark dusty brown fedora and held it across his chest. We exchanged the Chitonga greeting, Mwapona, how are you? He had no English, and today his voice was low, muffled with worry. I had to ask him to repeat himself. Please come. My wife is very, very ill. I walked with Tiki to his village. It was only half a mile, but worry dragged out the distance. I wondered how old he was. 60? 70? Nearly 3 times my 24 years. Tiki was named after a lucky coin, the Northern Rhodesian 3-penny bit that circulated in Zambia before independence. I assumed he was born a few years before the beginning of colonial rule in the 1920s, and I imagine he treated the intermittent stream of white strangers with the same courtly politeness he had accorded me, a Canadian volunteer, with the ambiguous title of community development worker. Tiki usually embodied a teasing cheerfulness touched with naivety, a man who attracted luck. But now he walked, head low, Wajiswa, Wajiswa. She is sick, she is sick. His hands lifted in involuntary, brief, helpless gestures. We left the rutted dirt road to follow a sandy path where orange zinnias leaned over us and cicadas screeched. Then the path took us into a field of corn, half again as tall as a man. The lush sea of green, shot with platinum silk, surrounded us and dropped powdery golden flecks of pollen on our skin. The gold almost disappeared on the fine hair of my forearms, but it shimmered on the black of Tiki's hands. This path followed the contours of the land, and I couldn't see where we were going. I wondered about my constant need to search for straight lines. We stepped out of the corn into a clearing with 3 rondavels, round grass-thatched, mud-brick sleeping huts built on pounded earth swept bare. The green corn formed a wall around the village, and I was careful to check out our point of exit, or like Alice down the rabbit hole, I might lose my way home. Under the cooking shelter, 2 women hunched over to tend to a bundle on the ground. 3 clay bricks marked the smoldering fire, and beside it lay Leandro, Tiki's wife. She rested on pieces of rags, curled up like a child, her hands folded under her head. Her hair was matted, stuck with bits of grass and seeds. One of the women wiped Leandro's face with water from a clay pot, but the flies still clung to her eyelids and the corners of her lips. Tiki crouched down beside her, began to rock from side to side and moaned softly. The light breeze didn't shift the odor of foul breath or the stench of sickness that surrounded her. Tiki touched her shoulder. His hand moved in a hesitant caress and then fell away. She responded with the slightest movement toward him. I had never seen a Chitonga man display open affection for his wife. I felt I was an intruder in the presence of their intimacy. I tried her pulse. It was strong, but her skin was dry and hot. In my pocket, I had only aspirin for fever and chloroquine for malaria. That is what I had, so that is what I gave. I took out the 4 pills and wrapped each pair in a scrap of paper and pointed to the position of the sun to explain when each group of tablets should be taken. Tiki took the pills with that confusing gesture of thanks, which also meant, I am sorry. I stood immobilized by the feeling there was something else I should do, fearing that the pills were useless. I asked Tiki to come tomorrow to get the rest of the 9 tablets needed to bring the parasite under control. I turned to face the wall of corn and entered the gap in the green. The sun was near the horizon, and the abrupt coolness of the July sunset raised goosebumps on my arms. Now the tunnel was shaded, and the blades of the corn's leaves whipped and scratched. It took forever to walk home. I felt disoriented, without boundaries to my skin. In the evening, after the lamps were lit and dinner was done, the voices of worry began. What would happen if Luando died? Would Tiki blame me and my medicine? The Irish nuns at the mission clinic gave me the chloroquine, but by law, only doctors and nurses could dispense the drug. Don't worry, I told myself. She'll be recovering by tomorrow afternoon. The next morning, after a fitful sleep, I tried to work, but the air was too warm and I was stupidly slow. A wasp had slipped inside the screen and taunted me. Then there was soft clapping at the door. Odi. Tiki said his wife was too sick. Could I give him the rest of the medicine now? He was such a lucky man to be living so close to me and my medicine. I wanted to tell him, no, the medicine is not right. The chloroquine wouldn't hurt her, but if she didn't have malaria, it would not help at all. I wanted to tell him I was afraid, but if I gave him my fear, that would be worse than giving him bad witchcraft. I could tell him that I was afraid of him, of what he might do if his wife did not survive. I counted out the remaining tablets. He took them, tipped his hat, and left. 2 days passed, and I expected to hear news from the farmers who came and went from the office that death had visited Tiki's village. On the 3rd morning, I was absently drinking lukewarm tea as I picked up a piece of cold toast. The morning sun laid slanted squares of light on the yellow kitchen table. Outside on the window frame, paper wasps rebuilt the nest I had broken up the day before. Gusts of air lifted leaves and knit them into the purple tangle of the bougainvillea bush. A chicken squawked. A woman's voice, Odi? I went to the door. Luando stood at the bottom of the steps. She held a hen upside down by its feet. Her bright orange headscarf was freshly washed, and her skirt had the stiffness of cotton dried in the sun. I came down to her, and we stood in the jacaranda's dappled shade. I wanted to tell her my relief, but I couldn't remember the words. The morning breeze brushed around us and lifted the edge of her skirt. She laughed, pushed the hem into place, made a small bow, and then offered me the hen in thanks. I accepted it. The hen struggled and flapped its rust-red wings as we passed it from hand to hand. Together, we stroked its head to calm it before releasing it among my flock of chickens. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. What is the work of going back 50 years and conjuring your 24-year-old self? Is it?
What's the work of it?
Yeah.
I've got old letters, and It's like, oh, God, preserve me from my 24-year-old self on paper. It's actually, it's very humbling, I think, might be the way I'm saying it. But I guess what's driven me to write this is these are just memories that were so strong that they just stayed with me. And I've talked to other people who've had experiences like in their early 20s or late teens, and they too can come up with these stories that, I guess because you're just on the cusp of adulthood, they live with you the rest of your life. Another piece that, because it was almost a torment, I thought I shouldn't just be doing this, I shouldn't be going back all the time. But I found a book about Isaac Dinesen, who wrote Out of Africa, and the writer said that for Dinesen that Africa was like a second childhood for her, in that, and I could identify with that because it meant to me that you get to see the way we see as a young child when we're hit with things we've never seen before, and they're, I feel, imprinted on us so strong. You just don't forget them. And I'm sure you could, think of something even right now that would come up that strongly. And the thing with going to Zambia was suddenly I got to see all these brand new things for the first time, and it was like being a kid twice. And I feel it's a huge gift that I was able to experience that. And so it's still trying to solve that puzzle.
Yes, and have these vivid memories and this confusion that you can now, from this distance, be able to investigate and be curious about and kind of figure it out, it sounds like. And that is a wonderful. These very strong memories, and you say these letters too must trigger memories as well, or people?
No, the curious thing is that I've only used the letters to check dates. That there's something about the memories that is totally different from the letters, that what I was observing or writing about at that age, that had it had no depth, no meaning. It was the price of toilet paper, big noises about all the ants and that kind of stuff, and that's not what's important. I think it's, what I tried to say at the beginning, it's this recognition that even though there seems to be this difference, we see differences with people, but as we were there a total of 6 years, so over that time, I began to be able to connect with people without any label that's, I just think it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and possibly maybe it would be time for us to start to learn to do that again. Yeah, because we've got such terrible examples of it not happening right now.
Right, to connect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Maleea, would you like to read to us from your current work in progress?
Okay. Oh, there I am. quite strongly. This is, I'm going to read 4 poems from a new manuscript, new book of poems that's in process right now. The first 2 and the last one are from a period of time that I did a residency in Spain this past summer. And I was fortunate to be at a place called Joya, which is an off-grid arts residency in the southeast of Spain, out in the middle of the desert, near but not walkable to a little tiny town called Vélez Blanco, because it's in the Altiplano, a very high area of Spain. The last rain was 3 years ago. It has this kind of crust of clay on the top. It almost looks like a museum quality landscape. I was able to get back to poetry for the first time in many years. The doctorate kind of derailed that in a fairly major way, as doctorates do. So this first one is called ombligo, which means belly button. And it's for a woman that I worked with and was able to collaborate with, Maysoon Shikali Meravilla, who is a Palestinian Spanish visual artist and embroiderer, and her father is a Palestinian refugee. And being there as a Jew and having another Jewish person there from Israel, just by coincidence, it was very interesting to see the dynamic that developed over the course of the residency. Ombligo. The wind rises as Em and I sit on the west bench and translate. She describes the Palestinian navel, the ombligo, sees an origin point where things might begin again. She's describing hope in the form of her many inventions. Already she has made a cave house of clay unfireable because of fire danger, embroidered a necklace of flowers, embroidered the house which she illuminated with holes like stars, like the hammam I opened to before meeting her hawk eyes and fearless forward motion smoker's voice, and made graceful rubbings of all the flowers and stones. Little cave houses she envisions, wood, paper, a house of clouds, infinitely movable, safe from all news toward the reclamation, she writes, of the natural environment by her people. We translate, I want to go back to ground zero and start again. I imagine a white clay landscape, like this one, but without the cool of a stone enclosure or 6 liters of water per person. I don't have to imagine this. Each morning we read another version. She smokes, I move countries, we leapfrog, checkers played with pottery shards. The story plays with us, we play it over again. It never stops. And the shards break into smaller pieces until the original form is lost. Ground zero is full of small, beautiful tungsten cubes, not unlike but not seeds, that have mostly not failed to enter houses and then bodies, achieving a term I learn, bone comminution. Little pinpricks in the ceiling of a body, hardly letting any light in, but destroying the inner sanctum of scaffold and darkness. I picture the olive tree of nothingness, belonging to no one. It stands in a field that cannot conjure itself into dust. It has no broken branches or roots, is remade each morning, fed by an umbilicus that pulses with stitches of color. The planets circle its black bark, its heartbeat the perfect regular beat of a scops owl, its sonar finding nothing. Here she is queen. Here her cave houses bloom, unfold themselves, and cannot fall. This next one is called Assemble, also written in the same landscape. Maybe you know this. Like a house wren or a cuckoo, the ability only to make a nest in another's home. Doubtful guest. The mist descends here, a little water coats the leaves of garden's fine feather-like cedar that will not stand up, like spit, like spitting on someone. Dee last night told me of the surgeon's O.R. glee, leaning over her in the green bright room, saying, "Hello, Donna," the thing he wants always to do, to see below the surface. A diviner, her gray eyes, iris blasted open as if the pupil's ink has spilled. And now 2 more seeds in her other, small flaws in a glaze saying no in the wrong tone. Probably yours and my historical meals, as in thousands of years ago, were also communal, and the labor shared at least between all the women, so some could take the time to imagine or even arc an animal's form onto stone. Probably there were more birds. M's thorns and leaves dipped in slip seemed drowned, as if blossoming had turned on itself, or the landscape made into a Pompeii of darkness. She did not know the prayers when I sang them. Tomorrow our bodies star and break constellation back to our apartments, our bicycles, our garages that won't stay closed. Is that traffic I hear, or just an unpaid ghost crunching over the gravel? The valley turns into giant powdery thumbprints pressed inexactly in gold. Inside me, many creatures carry leaves and swaddled packages from one side of the palace to the other. I find no desire not to be still or to be product. Between the time on the peak when the ibex was staring into the eyes of all my friends and my arrival back to this white room from the jigsaw rocks once a seabed, I forgot the color of the small four-petaled flowers I had drawn and so called and painted them rare blue desert flowers, though I suspect they were not. In cities today, people protest the price of bread, and even the most peaceable rue a bullet that grazed an ear for being a little off the mark. And in a field near the gold fields, a tractor churns yet up yet another civilization of communally questionable decision-making. I can feel the crowd rising in my spirit and ground. May the man at the gate tomorrow distribute only passports from the kingdom of the well. A lot of the poems that I've written so far for this collection are about the death of my dog last year, who was one of my lodestones and beloveds in the world. She was too good to be human, I think. So I've been writing, I guess, countdown poems in a sense, like numbers that are closer and closer to the day of her death. So this one is 34 days. And it's a different landscape. It's bringing you back home here. We enter the torture room side by side. Her hindquarters bumping my leg aligning her hip. Her machine is pain. Mine is sleeplessness. No one else in the room. But there's a window at one end that looks out to some trees, poplars, a rain cloud obscuring half-night's moonlit blue. It does not go on forever. There are often breaks I didn't expect, though I am dizzy and strange, while she sleeps, something like peace sparking her fur. And we weather this, inside a respite of no language, and its alternate, which is still full of our shared repertoire of touch and voice and blankets and dark. I didn't expect the room to be so warm. I didn't expect her breath like music. She laughs, she sighs. She mostly does not look at me unless I am not looking at her. Moths knit the room's corners, tightening the strings, nudging me to make sure I don't doze. I read. I watch spiders. And her sleeping ears and throat and paws and legs stretch against me, young, briefly. When she wakes and returns to the room, I heave her up and wait for purchase on the wood floor, guide her to the beef heart and chicken bones, salmon and squash that will ensure. She glances out the window at my future singularity and then away. That will ensure this lasts. And I'll just finish with one last poem. Try to hold it together. This one is Velez Blanco, and it's, I guess, going back to that Spanish landscape again. Soon I will dive again in little forest, school of rose swallows that charcoal the air. I'm afraid for your future. Schooling myself and slowing, I creep along the gully where the water, when it used to come, would rescape the clay fields into veins and interstitium where wild strawberries now have 3 years of floodway runners. I think my dreams of being a plant are A, an effort to die on my own terms, in other words, control, or B, my latest attempt to stay just once, forever, still. The scarf of dog fur continues to grow, often overnight. I push away from home's islands, the ones that float like blue marbles or landless basking sharks, a color that dissembles their vanishing water table, their crackled detritus of arbutus that I can hear and smell, no matter how I keep away. Uncomfortable litter, which I sat in while trying to take the pills that would have treated me for good. Was that a good decision, I wonder? And like my birth, it provides an anchor point from which to measure. 10 steps, 15. My urge to get up is stronger than to root. Z says maybe art saves nothing, but is something discovered that belongs to all of us. I go inside to escape rising heat, and in a white blast of cool meet my own care, coming down steps, thinking about re-inhabiting my body as a host. Will this too? I arrange my features into an artless gravity, the look from childhood staring at a beating fish's heart, or a hand on the tiller steering my family away from the sinking that would eventually unavoidably happen anyway. My mother, made uncomfortable by my being uncomfortable with the pageantry of her longing, which was only ever a continuation of her mother's, though different, colder disaster. I see you, unlikable slide protector of daisies and snowfalls. I see you with your rib projecting outward, making you by me forever. I'm sorry our dinner settings never matched, that your aunt stole the teaspoon that could have made us whole. Maybe, mostly, I'm sad. I can see your little repeating spiral of want executing itself all over the universe until it is periodically interrupted by a warring country or a child carrying too many pop bottles up a hill or your own failing cells. Tenderness. And by this, I mean I grow still and attend your slowing heart, or the particular weightless skin of clay that covers everything here. A curtain of translucency dropped over our ambitions. At some point, I realized alcohol was no longer helping and that I could climb the hill on my own, which was a relief and a sadness because I could climb the hill on my own. It is 39 degrees. This stone building has protected maybe 10 generations, and before that, others lived here and drew their hands on the walls of a cave. Everyone always a little dehydrated. The piled branch trimmings from the almonds, a smudge of darkness like a pool I could enter or a different history. But there is no water, and my cell walls continue pliable, soft. They admit more defeat every year. I realize I have not sampled the rosemary that carpets the hills, and the leaf taste is pure flower, as if dust has incorporated with a weaver's nest and a field of citrus. I love that I have, in brief respite from practicality, forgotten to gather any for the future. This, more than any weather, shows what species I may still be capable of continuing to be for a quickly shortening measure of time. Thank you.
Thank you for that stunning reading. Thank you. We were carried many places and so much light and bounding and just wonderful surprises. And yes, it's a liability, works in progress, that we're in our tenderest places. Can you say something about poetry in a time of grieving and what? Or writing.
Microphone. It's what we turn to. I mean, I think it's what saves us often. I mean, it certainly saves me when it's not trying to kill me. Often it does both at the same time.
The writing.
The poems themselves, I think. I mean, I think like a lot of poets, my best work is some form of not exactly translation, but in a kind of scribing of something that doesn't really come from me. And so it's often as much of a surprise and a period of teaching for me as it is, hopefully, for the reader when they read it.
So it's kind of like a way of thinking, do you think? Or
I think it's a way of not thinking, or thinking through not thinking.
Right. Okay. Right. That's wonderful. And how do you do it? Are you out? I mean, you've said it doesn't. You're not sure where it's coming from necessarily, but then when is the time for it?
Well, I have an app now on my phone that lets me write notes, and it's the first app that has actually worked. It can't translate what I say because for some reason my voice isn't taken up by computers very well, but I can kind of thumb things in. So I write a lot while I'm walking. I used to joke that when you're at a residency or you're working as a poet full time, that it's usually 23 hours of waiting, 45 minutes of crying, and 15 minutes of actual production.
Sounds wonderful.
That's generally how my days go.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks. Pauline, you're also writing poetry these days. Would you please read to us from your work?
Yes, we were talking earlier about this swerve to poetry that I seem to be making at the moment, and I've kind of blamed it on the world conditions, the global crises all over the place, and in particular war. I have always tried to write poetry. Well, I say always, but from a very early age, like I'm talking primary school. And then there came a point in my teens when I very tentatively offered my poem on the death of JFK, which I think all teens wrote a poem about that. It was, such a world event at the time. And I nervously awaited the response to this poem that I was showing the teacher. And she read it in silence, and she said, it doesn't scan, does it? And then I didn't write any more poetry. What a surprise. So tonight I'm going to actually begin with the first paragraph of a new story which I pulled together this year. And it will appear in a collection of stories which is going to be coming out with Biblioasis next year. So it is new, it hasn't been seen before. But I've chosen it for a reason. Although it's fiction, it's prose, I just would like to read this. It's called The Five-Barred Gate, and it's about the last two nuns of a religious order living out their lives in the north of England on a self-sufficient farm. In the deepest trough of night, before Lord's, Sister Catherine in her narrow bed wakes to a protest of goats. The throats on them, the blaring and the screams, her heart is pounding, galloping towards the animals through the dark. She is afraid to breathe until at some nocturnal precipice, the protest jams to a stop. Sister Catherine draws herself up on one elbow to listen. A few straggling complaints die away and the goats resettle. She listens to the silence. Impossible to stay put. Now she is a Bronte creation, a bluster of white hawthorn, billowing across the puddled yard to the barn, holding her nightgown clear of her rubber boots, the light she carries sweeping over the stones, the mud and the lumpy walls, swinging as if blown by the gusts of wind. At the door of the barn she listens, not wanting to set off the animals again. She pushes the bar back and heaves the door open a foot or so, lifting it a fraction to stop the scrape and groan. She is spooking only herself with this kind of stealth. She switches on the night light with the red bulb, counts the roused animals as they mill and resettle, seeing no threat, and she is reassured. And I think I chose that to sort of work my way into poetry tonight because it has two elements that for me constitute poetry, and that's image and movement. I think all poems have some kind of movement that pull you along, and hopefully to a new place by the time they end. And I feel really audacious, I have to say, is talking to you about poetry after what we've just heard with Maleea, who is so accomplished, and there'll be a lot to talk about. So I was talking about turning away from fiction because of the feeling that I can no longer sit at my desk and make stuff up. The world is coming at us all the time in the images that we see and the stories that we read. In the deep sort of disarray and distress of our times, poetry seems the only response to the world. The urge to respond to what we're witnessing daily is urgent, powerful, and demands a concentrated expression. Novels perhaps are something for later generations to read when they want to know how we came to this place. So this is a very short poem called Message. Listen, life is hard. It is hard simply to inhabit a human body, for we are not perfect, no, not a pinnacle of evolution at all. Every organ fails in the end. So could we just leave each other be? Make our best efforts to savor the streams of life that miraculously from time to time wash into our own. Bird song at dawn, perhaps, or in late afternoon, a brimming cloud, its sunlit belly summoning the taste of lemons. A mouthful of fresh water, yes, when we're thirsty. Could we at least refrain from sending explosives to blow the limbs of strangers off their bodies, or bring down the roofs of neighbors on the delicate crowns of their children? Could we just manage that? And what I'm finding in writing poetry at the moment is that it's incredibly hard to read and restrain the urge to edit it as you're reading. Even now, I find an odd word I would like to change. The next piece I wrote as a prose poem. I used to call such pieces short shorts. I would do anything to avoid the word poem. This one, although it's anchored here in Canada, comes from the same kind of emotional response on my part as the piece I just read. It concerns the people we live beside whose futures, for one reason or another, have become impossible. It's called The World in Pieces, though that isn't set in stone. The alternative title is To Break Alive. Take the path across the barren park right now, between the gritty playground and the dog enclosure, and you will see an older man and a young guy sitting in silence on a low wall, leaning forward, a space between them, forearms resting on their knees. The young man is smoking intently, his hand cupping the last of his cigarette, the stub in a fierce pinch between 3 fingertips and thumb. Abruptly, after the last inhale, without looking up, he flicks it with his thumb and grinds it hard under his shoe. You know that gesture. You can read it. There is no one who could not. The older man reaches, places a hand high on his friend's shoulder, leaves it there a moment. Still neither of them cares to speak, and they continue as before, staring at the gravel. Take the same path on your way back, and you will see the older man has left. The younger one, the smoker, is still there, standing now, amusing a small boy who came from nowhere to offer a worn and scuffed ball. The young guy is adept, his feet nimble as if they worked a hacky sack, the ball everywhere on his body while the small boy watches. He pumps it with his knee and the ball is on his head, and again, and again. And then, by sudden magic, the ball is spinning on his forehead while he leans back and extends his arms, a woman about to shimmy, offering the spinning world back to the world, making the small boy clap his fists to his mouth, then throw his arms wide open as if to catch the gift, laughing his delight, laughing. That I've said I called it a prose poem, and then decided, well, no, if you want to be a poet, let's make this a poem and do line breaks. So, so I broke it up and I submitted it to a contest, and to my delight, it made the shortlist. And contests can be so good for that, giving you that extra bit of confidence, that kind of validation from outside. I know people who work in writing groups and get that experience from sharing their work. And it really is a good thing. And I think of all the years I wasted trying to sort of do the whole job myself from beginning to end. It's not the smartest idea. This next poem will perhaps alleviate some of the darkness of those others. And this was written as a poem actually a few years ago, but it's never seen the light of day except to be given to the people whom it was about. It's called, I'll tell you, first of all, you need to know that it begins with a very short stanza about the way water will cling to the skin on an astronaut's hands. I don't know if any of you remember Chris Hadfield, who has made, that's the Canadian astronaut. He had made some videos for education purposes, and they were so informative. And one of them, he had a demonstration of the behavior of water in zero gravity. But that's just a reference at the beginning. This poem is about love in Barcelona. The water on the astronaut's hands purls and clings, courses on his skin. It does not want to leave. In Barcelona, she buys boots of, yes, Spanish leather, and wears them, yes, right now, out of the shop. She buys olives too, and sausage, squid, and white manchega cheese, eating it on a shawl the colour of flames, watching his face as he pours her brandy from Jerez. In Bégur, he buys her black lace to wear beneath her wrap, and she shows us one hot afternoon the lace black under the pale roses, perfect for a siesta. In Cadaqués, they swim naked before breakfast, in water almost navy blue, blind to the white houses climbing the cliffs behind. They eat tapas at lunch, at dinner. They eat tapas whenever they can, bringing their fingers to each other's lips, laughing. We laugh with them, drink and lean closer, lean sideways to them, hoping what courses and flickers on their skin will rub off on ours, hoping we will still know how to drink fire. This whole process of preparing something to read for tonight has been really enriching for me, because I've been looking back at old notebooks and places I've been with my work and finding little clips of possible poems. This one is also a prose poem. Was written quite some time ago, but I have an opportunity now to tinker with it anyway. It's called Pair, Shepherdess and Shepherd, circa 1820. So think China figurines, okay? It was hard standing side by side those long years, maintaining the pose, retaining the glaze, while behind porcelain lips the tongue imagined. 200 years in the glassy bright, with eyes aching to close against the glare. Hard just to keep standing at all with the thought of it thundering, a plunging horse under the breastbone, weakening the knees. Everything is hard when to fall is a shattering calamity. And so the need to wait for the right moment, the door opening on a path into darkness, a mossy place to cosset pottery bones, to coddle cold, to lie down now, with meticulous care, the clothes coming away with the sound of shells underfoot. Such a long time to wait. Their lips flicker together like brittle wings, find secret chinks while limbs clink softly and move squeakily slow across each other. Soon they are making enough noise for a whole cabinet of Hummel. She She thinks his fragile fingers must break, or she. Afterwards, the same thought occurs to both. The bristles beginning to push through the glaze, the exquisite curve of armpit beginning to smell, not to mention the thing in the center of the chest cavity that she imagines must be what they call pain. Each helps the other on again with the difficult clothes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauline. You said earlier that you allow for a very long delay in even showing your poetry to anyone, let alone submitting it. Why do you think that is? Or even calling it a poem, I think you said.
The long delay in even
Yeah.
showing it.
Yeah.
Oh, it was total lack of confidence. I was destroyed.
Okay. All back to the scannability of your...
Yeah, I mean, you know, the schools at that time, great, you know. It's a free public education, but my goodness, the damage on the way. There was another teacher in a different school who walked behind the group of us all assembled to practice some song or whatever. For an assembly we were practicing, and she was walking up and down behind the line looking for the person who was the flat note. And I knew that she had stopped behind me. I mean, you know, you are at 7, whatever, you're not stupid. I knew she was there. And then the class teacher said, "Okay, Pauline, you can go back to class now."
No.
I never sang another note.
Not kind.
And I'm still learning Happy Birthday so that I can sing it whenever we have a cake.
We have such... And Mary, it took you to write your memoir, I think, many years before you. So talking about works in progress, that's a long passage of time. Why would that be?
Well, I had the chance to work with W.O. Mitchell about 40 years ago, and he talked about the imposter syndrome. And so here I am. I published my first book properly at 74. And it... Okay. So I can say, as soon as I go back to Canada, started writing as part of a writers group up north, and then everything came to a screeching halt when one of my kids became ill for a very long time. And during that time, I could write a journal, but I couldn't write beyond that. And what worked for me in that time was to paint. So I began painting and doing photography. And that, I guess that was the creative thing. It carried me through in that very long period. And then I think it's about 15 years ago, my grandchild said to my son, his dad, "Tell me some stories about when you were a kid." So my son asked me to write some things down. I got started, but what I just didn't really know if I could do it again. So I looked for a continuing ed class, found a memoir course run by Yvonne Blomer, who I didn't know from Adam. And I phoned her and said, this is what I've been asked to do. Would your course help me to write stories for a little kid about things that happened many years ago when we lived in Zambia? And she took me through the business end of it all and then said, yes, it will. So I had told her, my son is 40, his son is 4. My son was born in Zambia, and now this young child wants some stories from that time. She said, I think you should know, I am 40, my son is 4, and I was born in Zimbabwe, just across the border. And it was like, I said, I'm meant to be there. And so I began. And this is the result now. Though the thing that surprised me was that I was cleaning up some cupboards downstairs, and I found small beginnings of some of the things that I'm writing in this memoir. Things that I felt I just didn't think I could touch them, but I've decided that I'm going to work with them. So
Excellent.
that's part of the long story.
Thank you. Interesting. We have so many forms here and different things we want to say through them. So we've had your fiction and your poetry and what the urgency you're finding that's responding to. And I want to ask Maleea about your storytelling work, please. And what is this?
Well, I think that if we're going to get people to actually take action on climate change, we first have to get them to care about where they are and form an attachment with place. And that extinction of experience, as Lynn Baldwin calls it, is very predominant these days, where people don't have an attachment to place. They don't know what creatures are around them. They don't know the names of the species. They don't know how things go. And I think if you can tell a story about place in a way that gets people to care and start to form those attachments and really start to see where they are, it can't help but engender more responsible citizens who will actually fight to save the remaining arbutus trees or whatever happens to be on the chopping block that week. And I do it through field journaling that I teach in my geography classes. I also do it through postdoc work where I have the fortune to have a supervisor who, though he is cross-posted between engineering and geography and is very much a scientist, is also very open to story and to art. And so I've created this artist commission program where artists across Canada, I'm funding them to tell stories of place and to produce pieces and then offer them to their communities and then offer a workshop template that can be used by other communities to help that happen again. And then I'm also telling stories of place through helping non-governmental organizations to tell about the work that they've done in multimedia form, often through a template called Story Map in ArcGIS. So it's photographs, sound, videos, text, all coming together into kind of an immersive experience that's a story of place. And I think scientists are really clamoring for this kind of work. We see there's great work happening in the writing department with science journalism telling the stories of climate change. Sean Holman, I think. And scientists are understanding that it's not facts and figures that are going to change our minds and change our behaviors, more importantly. It's connection to emotion and to attachment to a place.
Through that knowledge and that builds a relationship with once you know.
Once you start to care for something, you can't knowingly treat it badly. I think you're also much more likely to fight for it if you understand the intricacies of what's there and you have a relationship with it, I think.
Very good. Thank you. I did not bring a timepiece up here. I have no idea what time it is. Anybody have the time?
10 to 9.
10 to 9. Oh, terrific. Thanks. We have time for a few more. I'll ask you a couple more questions about your work and your current work, and then we might have time for a couple questions from the audience. That's good for you. Thanks. Well, I'm not sure, actually. I mean, how did it feel to read from work that's not finished? I mean, Did it make you want? Were you careful selecting things that you might select something that wasn't? We had to be honest and read something that was a little not fully baked, or no? You chose things you knew had a bit of glimmer, clearly. And I guess, how does a project catch light for you? How do you begin it? And that could be, I think, well, where does it start? You with your persistent memories, for sure, but I guess a new poem or a new, I guess I think of a project as, do you set out to write one poem at a time, or are you setting out to write a collection of poetry, or over time they start to build? I mean...
Oh, that's the question I wanted to put to Maleea. Because at the moment I'm just writing individual poems and looking for connections between them. Okay. But I'm intrigued to think about having a vision of a book to begin with. Does that happen for you with a poetry book?
No. I wish it did. I think this book had a vision. But I think often that vision is only clear in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, perhaps. Zapruder talks about this too, about how the subject that you're trying for may not be clear at first when you first start writing. And that's one reason that a poem can go through many iterations, but it's also the reason that a book doesn't have a shape until the end, until you know what has been created. Because you kind of write yourself into clarity, and often you have to kind of approach it through the back door, which means you have to be a little bit blind and move forward in the dark as if you're, trying to feel something. And I think that's often how it works for me, at least.
And Mary, do you have a sense of your second memoir? Is it going to be, are you shaping it the same as your first, or do you feel you want it to be of a different approach?
I think what Maleea's saying, just that you sort of bumble around. There's something that's really hard to define that's driving you, and it's kind of like you just have to keep on going. I got this picture in my head this afternoon that it's a bit like making a quilt. I don't make quilts. I haven't got the patience, but my sister does. So I feel like, okay, it's like I'm creating a square, and I'll work on that one for a while, and then I'll do another one. And then I've got all these squares which may or may not relate, and then over time start bringing them together. And then a pattern starts to form, and then there's this searching to find, now what are the connections between all these pieces? Why have these things been in my head pushing forward? Which, I know I'm not writing poetry, but I think that there may be a similarity.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And I've found nonfiction to be like that as well. Very patchwork, like you don't know where the pieces line up and connect until you've got lots of them.
And then you start to get this bigger picture, so that it's like you don't really know where you were going until you're almost there. It's a way of no, it's really like exploring in the dark. You don't really sure why you're doing it, and then it just kind of it won't quit. You said you're not sure where it comes from, and I'm feeling like we're not quite sure what is it, this thing that's pushing, and you just have to continue following it.
That said, there are books that do map things out and do it beautifully. Ali Blythe's Steadfast, which was nominated for a Victoria Butler Book Prize last night, mapped out the titles from Keats's Bright Star. And so everything was set up in advance, and it's a gorgeous book.
It's a beautiful structure.
Yeah,
beautiful. Does anybody in our audience have some questions about writing and works in progress, and in particular perhaps the works we've heard from tonight? And we'll have a few more minutes together. No?
I'd like to
That's actually from a newspaper clipping from maybe 20 years ago. There was an article about two nuns in Yorkshire who were living out their lives quite contentedly with goats. And I put that clipping in a file, and I could see there was a story there. And I've carried it around in this file for so many years, and suddenly this year I felt I knew how I could go forward with this idea. And it was all to do with climate change. It was to do with climate change and the pandemic. And that was something that they couldn't really avoid, even though they were living this pretty idyllic life on the moors. It's pretty obvious when you stand in front of, say, the raspberry bushes and there are no bees. The bushes are in bloom and you can hear the silence. So those things from right now came into their story. That's why this strange thing with goats and nuns, yeah. Oh, I think I can answer that. If it's a novel, it's a sight that there is a glimmer of something there for an ending. And that is absolute jet fuel to keep going, even though you hadn't known quite where you were going. It's seeing the possibilities, I think.
I'm thinking that for me it has been the experience of sharing it with readers and getting their responses. And I've had a problem I've been trying to work out in this particular one, and suddenly last week it was like there was a settled feeling in my stomach that said, I think you've got that part solved. Time to move on. But it was like a physical feeling. But it's a combination of many things.
How about you, Maleea? How do you know when a poem is finished or you've reached the last line?
Oh. The top of my head comes back onto my body, I guess. Yeah, I think most art is abandoned, not ever quite finished, because we move on. I'm not, I think, it's usually when I start to feel like myself is no longer fragmented for that brief period while I'm writing. It's not a bad feeling, it's actually a good feeling to be fragmented.
Did your dog help you with the actual writing? And you which I'm a pet lover. And did you write a poem every day? Was that, you had day 34, and was that really helpful in the process?
I did write while she was dying. And so I had notes, I had kind of drafts of some things. Some things I wrote after her death as a way of trying to understand, I guess, what that inadequate translation between species was all about. And I think, as many people who've written about people who have died, or beings that have died, it is a way of keeping that person or that animal next to you somewhat as well. Like, you can keep hold somehow, which is nice.
Nice.
quite understand the poem about your dog, but my dog Nicky died a year ago today, and he was almost 17, and I had him since he was 6 weeks old.
We have similar
And
stories.
while you were reading that, I could not keep the tears from falling.
Oh, yeah, mine was 17 as well, and she was a rescue who I got when she was 10 months. So she saw me through my 30s and 40s. I totally understand what you're saying.
I
It's
think of him every day.
yeah, me too. Yeah, they're better than us in a lot of ways.
I remember when I took him to the vet, he had Cushing's disease, and the vet said, well, we can put him on this medication and you might get another year out of him, were his words. And I said, I'll do anything to get another week out of him.
They pass us, isn't it? That's the story. That's Billy Collins' poem. Our dogs are younger than us, and then they become very quickly older than us.
Yeah.
So many years per year, and it's something to learn. And do we have any other questions? If not, I will thank Pauline, Maleea, and Mary so much for reading tonight. And thank you. And there are books, their books, of course, out for sale. Thank you.
So I get to do the final thanking of this wonderful panel and the insights and the amazing magic of how things happen and how they develop and how poetry and fiction and art and writing makes us such better people. Maybe not as good as dogs, but pretty good. So thank you very much to Mary, to Maleea, to Pauline, and to Sarah for pulling this wonderful evening together for us. And if you're interested in buying books, you might not be able to buy their books quite yet, but they have other books, and there are lots of books out in the foyer that you can buy. And there are many more events to come, so check your program. Our website, it features Q&A, so there's some interviews with the authors and a place for you to sign up for our newsletter. So please refer to victoriafestivalofauthors.ca. And this final question, the final comment, if you'd like to support the festival in another way, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and encourage your friends to attend one of our events. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or Canada Helps page. Your donations are instrumental for us carrying on with these marvelous events. Hope to see you again, and thank you again.